Welcome to Shelf Builders Podcast, the podcast where we get to know authors by talking about their bookshelves. I'm Dustin Porta, and today with me is Tall Owl. And for our non-LitRPG authors, that's your pen name. It's not an uncommon sounding pen name for a LitRPG author either. Can you introduce yourself, introduce your books?
My name is Tall Owl. I chose that name because there's this picture of Stolas from the Croatia, and it's just the most hilarious thing ever. It's just him as a tall owl. So that's how I got the name. My book series is called Pushing Back Inevitability. It's a lit RPG progression fantasy about a god of war from a different world coming to invade Earth, basically.
Let's jump right into talking about the kind of books you keep around. Can you sort of briefly describe what your bookshelves look like, how you keep them?
My bookshelves are generally chaotic. I don't have any sort of sorting system.
Good, neither do I.
I have a lot of philosophy, literary stuff that I keep around. Before I started writing, writing a lit RPG. I wasn't a big fantasy reader, but recently I got some Robert Jordan and some other Tolkien stuff other than Lord of the Rings. What I'm reading right now it's called The Arcane Teaching by William Walker Atkinson. It's a esoteric text. Sorry for the squeaking. My chair is awful.
That's okay. That's all part of the ambiance of the writing environment, which is part of the show. I ask people what their offices look like too. What they keep around for inspiration. I also read a lot of philosophy. What other philosophy? Well, I read a lot of Plato and only a lot of Plato. What other philosophy stuff do you keep around? I can add that to my list.
Meditations by Marcus Aurelius was my first introduction into philosophy. Schopenhauer's, some Viktor Frankl.
Do you organize by genre at all? Like,
oh no,
you mentioned no. You just keep it all wherever it fits.
I have a shelf that I have specifically dedicated to books I've already read, so I don't reread them because I want to get through all my collection eventually. So how about you? What Plato have you read?
I was telling one of my other guests I've read The Republic, but that's not my favorite. I kind of like the little quirky ones that people don't always reference. What's that?
The Nemokian, or I can't pronounce it.
I think that was one of them. I really like. I love the Symposium. I guess that one's a much more common, but the Symposium's probably my favorite. The scene where Thrasymachus bursts in drunk and interrupts the party, and it's just a very disorderly book, which is it's a disorderly philosophy. I keep those around, and I have The Republic because I've been meaning to give it a deeper read because I read it in college and I rushed through it because I didn't enjoy it as much as the Symposium or the.
I think everyone who read it in college just rushed through it. I think that's
it's something I'd like to write a bit more of. I'd like to try and write dialogues. No one does that anymore. You write dialogue for your fiction, but no one sits down and says, "I'm going to write a dialogue today."
It's like a philosophical dialogue between yourself and yourself, basically.
Yeah.
Is it?
It could be. You could make up an imaginary proxy.
A lot of Aquinas' work, Thomas Aquinas, he does that, where he rebukes an invisible sparring partner. How he'd he'd go into his apologetics and he'd try to come up with the arguments that people would have against him, and it's a pretty interesting read if you've never read Aquinas.
I think you'll find if you're just sort of getting into fantasy from like this, and you had mentioned literary fiction. I'm going to go back and ask you about that in a bit. But if you're just getting into fantasy, I think you'll find the cool thing about fantasy is that it can accommodate all other genres. It's rare you'll find a fantasy that's just fantasy. You can insert a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if you find some that are very heavy in philosophy.
Do you know what theosophy is?
I don't. Tell me.
Theosophy was run by one Madame Blavatsky in the 1800s. It's a esoteric belief system, and a lot of 20th century and late 19th century fantasy authors actually took from Blavatsky.
Hmm.
It's stuff like Lemuria, if you've ever heard of that, Mu.
No, this
Uh,
whole podcast is just me admitting that I don't know anything.
oh,
The whole podcast is people suggesting things and me saying, "No, please explain it." It's
it,
humbling.
have you heard like Hyperborea, maybe, or
Uh,
the Atlantean cycle?
no, Hyperborea. I know Hyboria, Hyborian Gates, the card game. If I'm thinking old school fantasy genre stuff,
Yeah, like
Hyperborea. No,
uh,
are we talking philosophy or are we talking fantasy?
Theosophy was an esoteric like
Theosophy.
belief system. It basically like how the history of the world from Madame Blavatsky's perspective went, and she was completely serious. So she completely believed it, and it was weird. It's a weird thing to
Fantasy.
get into.
When you talk about like what's the meaning of life, fantasy complicates that because all the gods are usually real, and
Yeah,
you see them and the characters are interacting with them. I read somewhere someone was trying to figure out how you make a D&D character that's an atheist when the gods are walking around on Earth.
uh,
You'd have to be
uh,
insane.
from someone who, or I heard from someone who played D&D, it's basically they believe that the gods don't deserve worship.
That does make sense. I wanted to ask you more about your literary fiction too, because you'd mentioned that you have, before we started rolling, you mentioned you have a lot of literary fiction on your shelves. What sort of books do you keep around?
It's mostly classics like Moby Dick. I have Bless Me Ultima, if you've ever read that.
Say that again?
Bless Me Ultima. That's probably one of my favorites.
No,
And my
I don't know
favorite, as
that
I
one.
mentioned before we started recording, is I Heard the Owl Call My Name.
I've
Uh,
never heard that one. Moby Dick has been my favorite book at various times.
I,
I heard the owl call my name. Tell me what that book's about.
uh, I Heard the Owl Call My Name is a book about a Catholic priest who was sent to a tribe in northern British Columbia because he was
Hmm.
dying, and the vicar, not the vicar, the diocese thought it'd be good for him. It's a very like sentimental book. It's like it goes into the meaning of struggle and the meaning of a hard existence, basically. And it ends with him hearing the owl call his name, which is a reference to to the beliefs of that area that if you hear an owl call your name, you're about to die. So it's a very potent book.
Hmm.
It had me in tears at the end.
Tell me, is that why you have owls everywhere?
Uh, no,
I don't know if I'm going to post the picture or not. That's up to
go.
you, but I do want to. I want to hear about these owls that I saw
Uh,
all over your shelves.
okay. The owls. My brother was stationed in Djibouti, and he sent back a little owl statue, and it just escalated from there. So I like whenever I go into stores and I find something semi owl related, I buy it and just put it up with the other one. It,
That
it's
happens.
it's like a totem, I guess. My own personal totem.
My mom had a cow thing. Everyone thought that she collected cows. She didn't. They just thought she did, and then she wound up with cows everywhere because every time someone would gift her something, it was a cow.
The worst one I found is just like macrame steak owl thing. It's hideous. It is hideous, and I left it at a campsite to scare people. Yeah.
I should keep asking you bookshelf questions, but I can't let this other question go. This should come at the end of the interview, but I want to ask, how do you get from here to LitRPG?
I think it
And that's going to
has.
lead into me asking how your reading influences your writing. But how do you first find out about LitRPG, and how do you decide you want to write it?
Uh, from comics, solo leveling. If you've heard of that, that
I haven't.
it's one of the bigger like manhwas, a Korean comic. An anime
Okay.
is coming out soon about it,
Oh, okay.
and I got interested in it because I saw like a lot of storytelling potential. Because you're it's very hard to show growth gradually in a character, but when you
Like,
have a numerical show of growth in the
is that
character.
how you do it in your story? You have scores or power levels or
It's
rankings?
the way my character interacts with the quote unquote system, which is the something that lit RPGs need. It's
Yes.
called the Shard of Bifrost, which is the shard of
Okay.
the Rainbow Bridge, and he speaks to his patron spirit through it, and the patron spirit uses magic to enhance whatever he chooses in himself.
I can already see the influences from some of the stuff you read, just influencing the way you think and talk about this from an angle that other lit RPG authors might not go for. It's interesting. Um, this is on Royal Road, right? Like
Yeah,
that's your primary. Does it come out there first and then it disseminates to other platforms? I think you said it was elsewhere too.
Royal Road and Web Novel are the two free alternatives, and I
Okay.
have my books on Amazon as well. Once the current arc is over, I plan on taking it off of Royal Road and going into the other arc instead and putting it on KDP, the or KU Kindle Unlimited.
If you hear what sounds like screaming banshees, that's just a cat,
Uh, my
and I
my
can't do
dog's
anything to
currently
stop him.
my dog's currently scratching at the door right now.
This cat's more of a feature than a distraction. He'll probably end up on screen a couple of times. But we we were talking about Royal Road, and I wanted to ask you. I had another interviewee mention one of their favorite books was a Chinese web novel, and there's no there's no size limit, and so one book was I think she held up like 7 or 8 volumes, like a stack like this. It looked like a whole series. She said that's book one. And has that been a problem for you, or have you not looked into uh, making paperbacks yet? Because
Uh,
some of my books I don't
yeah,
look into paperbacks right away.
I hate doing the paperback process with Amazon. I hate the cover thing. I hate the trim sizes. So no, I haven't, and I don't think I ever will, unless I can get someone else to do that for me.
A lot of people do get other people to do it.
Yeah, under my real name, I have a couple paperbacks out on Amazon, and I hated every single second of it. I had to trim down the cover, expand the cover. It was just annoying to deal with.
I've heard of people who sell just the paperback rights to their book. I mean, you'd have to have a good selling
Yeah,
ebook first, but I've heard of people who hire it out. And then I know a lot of people who do it on like Ingram Spark or other places that print differently than Amazon does, or I know someone who only really sells a lot of hardcovers. They don't sell near as many paperbacks because their fans want something super high end. They're like, if I didn't want something that I can keep forever on my shelf, I would just get an ebook. Now I've run out of questions.
I've never tried doing hardcovers because paperback was so annoying.
Yeah, I haven't done hardcovers yet either. I've been lucky enough. So my only foray into lit RPG was with another author, and the other author did all the publishing work. That was great. They had a bigger platform, and they had people they worked with to do cover design and stuff. So we worked on the content together, and then they took it off, and very happy about that.
Your book's about the collaborating.
It was called Enora Unleashed. Arlo, back in like 2015, Arlo Adams published. It might have been later than that. Might have been 2018, somewhere in between there. Arlo published Enora Online, and Enora Online was maybe 7 or 8 books long, and I remember reading it because we were friends already, and I really liked book 5 to the point that I said, if you ever want to collaborate on something, I'm down. And he was like, yeah, why don't we just make a parallel series to this one, set in the same world? So we did Enora Unleashed. It's got a new main character. It's set in a video game world, and I'm really big into sailing and old-fashioned sailboats. So it's a nautical
Moby
story.
Dick is your
Moby
Moby Dick was your favorite book.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I've lived on a sailboat
Really?
for several years. I crewed on a schooner or two. And Moby Dick was a big influence for sure.
I'm terrified of deep water, to be honest.
Oh, me too. Like I went swimming one time the whole time I was on the boat, and I didn't like it.
Man,
No, it's really freaky when you leave sight of land.
my friends and I a couple years back got this brilliant idea to float down the Sacramento River with pool floats. The most terrifying thing I've ever done.
Oh, it's worse when you can't see the bottom. So a little bit murky makes it that much scarier. Sailing, you feel a little bit better when you're sailing, but like when land goes away, the thing you don't think about is, you know, everyone thinks that the ocean looks bigger than the land when you're out on it, but the horizon shrinks because the horizon slopes away. You know, the land's not sticking up above the water, so it's almost like the whole world gets a little smaller, and it feels a little bit claustrophobic when the waves are big and the storm's closing in on you. It's freaky. It's a weird feeling. I don't always like it, but like staring into the abyss.
It's something I would
But
like
that's
to
part of the fun of it.
Going back to the meaning behind struggle and whatnot. That's one of my life philosophies. Uh, from I heard the owl call my name. That's what I'm referencing. You know, it's been one of my animating philosophies in life is to experience struggle. I've lived in tents and whatnot to just to experience how it is for months on end.
When you're living in a tent, do you bring a handful of books with you?
Oh yeah, I had. I guess that's kind of facetious of me. I was working at a campground and living in a tent at the same time. I brought like a whole box full of books, but I didn't read a single one because my friend recommended me a book and let me borrow one.
We got to bring this back to your bookshelves. How do you imagine your ideal reader interacting with your books? Um, what do you think? What do you think they're doing when they open up Royal Road? And what does it mean to them?
My ideal reader would be like speculating about like because I like to put in hints about what's going to happen later in the story into the
Mm-hmm.
story. So once that becomes well known in the to my readers, I would like my ideal readers to start speculating what this means, what this sentence here means, what this metaphor here means, or is this a
So,
metaphor?
so you
So
you want them to read very closely.
yeah, that,
You're
uh,
not you're not just throwing interesting phrasing out there for no reason. Every
no,
every
no,
word means something.
not every word, but there's certain things that definitely mean something. Like in one of the side stories that I wrote called "The Shield of New Orleans," the priest who is getting chosen to be a part of this war, basically, he has a vision of certain saints, and those saints mean something to the future of the story and the future of his story, basically.
What do you do with these side stories?
I post them on Amazon.
Do you also have a Patreon? I know a lot of Royal Road people do.
I'm gonna open one up tomorrow. Start
Okay.
putting book 4. I just finished book 3, so I want to.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm opening up my Patreon tomorrow, putting the first 8
Okay.
chapters of book 4.
Have you
I
ever
hope.
used, I forget what it's called, Ko-fi coffee? It's Ko-fi.
Yeah,
Uh, I recently started one rather than doing Patreon. I haven't actually brought anyone to it yet, but I just wanted to explore it a bit. It's kind of cool.
yeah. I use it specifically because a few of my real life friends don't have a Kindle, so I
Oh,
use
okay.
it to upload like docs of my
Right. You
books.
can distribute digital files through there. I think you can sell physical product through there too, if I'm not mistaken. I don't really remember, but it's cool.
Yeah,
I'm liking Kofi. It also has a very like tactile vibe. Like you kind of feel like you're visiting the author's uh,
like a
little
personal
nook where they,
bookstore.
yeah, little nook that they arrange how they like with the stuff that they want people to see. I guess you can do that with everything like Patreon. There's just something about Kofi that felt cozy. That's why I signed up. Maybe I just drink
Yeah.
too much coffee. I don't
Uh,
know.
I prefer Kofi, but I have no clue how to set up recurring payments with them. So
I don't even know if we're saying it right. It could be coffee. I want to ask you more about your books before we go. I think we probably got 10 minutes left. Tell me a little bit more about your bookshelf. Do you have more than one in the house?
I have three behind me.
Okay.
Uh, I have another one inside of my living room. It doesn't contain much because uh, I have dogs who like to drag things away. So
Are you a paperback reader or do you have prized hardcover? Are you like a collector as well?
I have a few that I keep as a collection item. I have a first print copy of Tennyson's Princess Maud, I think it's called. It I, I found it in a antique store and I keep
That's
it.
really cool.
Yeah,
Tennyson was a poet, right?
yeah. He
Do you
was
read? Do you have much poetry on your shelves?
yeah. I have William Butler Yeats. He's one of my favorite poets.
Yep, I love Yeats.
Kipling. I like.
Have
Who
you ever
else?
read Walcott? I'm big into
No,
Derek Walcott, but
I,
he's a little newer compared to the classics.
I, a lot of my bookshelf is the classics because I made it a goal of mine to read the entire Western canon, and
That's
so I have a
ambitious.
lot of the Western canon.
How do you define the Western canon?
There's a list on Wikipedia.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, the last poem I read was The Inferno. I'll say that.
Do Eastern European authors fall into the Western canon? Like
I th- I think Tolstoy might.
Chekhov, Tolstoy?
I think War and Peace is considered part of it.
Hmm.
Which I think is an Eastern European.
I'm
All I know is a lot of Eastern European literature is long and depressing.
I like Chekhov because he's short and depressing.
Uh,
His short. I don't read his plays, but I read his short stories. They're all very short.
yeah, it is. That's where the expression Chekhov's gun come from, right?
I think that's from the plays, which I don't know why I haven't read him when he's one of my favorite writers. Um, It's cool to know you have a poetry section in your shelf.
Yeah, poetry actually plays a big part of pushing back inevitability
Really?
because yeah, it's how the magic works. Basically, you have to congeal the spirits into granting you a favor. Basically,
Yeah.
all
That
the
makes
spells
sense.
are short couplets or something like that.
I mean, it's cool because I never really see anyone doing that, and it's also cool because even though no one's doing it, it goes back to how we traditionally think of magic. Like it's everything's a
Yeah,
invocation, convocation, whatever
yeah.
it's called.
It,
But
it,
it's good to see someone bringing it back.
specifically, the magic in my world is done through elemental spirits and gods. Basically, that's the
Hmm.
two sources of magic, and the elemental spirits come from the Comte de Gabale, which is a Renaissance work on elemental spirits, basically, and the gods. I just look up random gods for random things because I can't think of every single god ever. I can't hold
Uh,
that in my mind.
Well, the nice thing about the genre is people like that. Like,
Yeah.
it's cool when things are referential and familiar. And I wanted to ask you, speaking of the gods, and you don't have to have a good answer for this, the power level system that you have in your book. I don't know if there is an answer for this, but is the system something that was created? And when it was created, there were levels to it? Or is the system something that already existed? And then when people found out about it,
It was created in response to the invasion of the world, of the war god coming into the world. The spirits
cool.
and gods of our world basically got together and said, hey, what's a familiar system that people could get into easily? And they
I like
came up
that.
with a numerical thing.
I wasn't expecting a concrete answer on that, but I'm impressed that I got one. Um, my brain's going everywhere. I want to keep asking about poetry because that was my focus in college, but I know that's not what we're here to talk about.
No, I thought like
Uh,
poetry.
I write it. I put it into my fantasy books all the time, even though people tell me that they don't. They don't put it into theirs. I just keep doing it.
Yeah,
If it was good enough for Tolkien, it's good enough for me.
I just recently got one of my poems published under my real name, so I was excited
Oh,
about that.
congratulations! I've never
Thank you,
been published in a journal before.
thank you. Uh, yeah,
You don't have to
poetry.
share that with me here, but after we finish, definitely.
Yeah, poetry plays a big part in my story, specifically because I like poetry. I like writing poetry.
Do you like it when it rhymes, or are you one of the free verse people?
Depends on what mood the poem I'm writing is trying to convey. I've done both free verse and more traditional like sonnets and whatnot. Most of my poems I would say are free verse, but it like in the story they are definitely more free verse. They don't have to rhyme. It just has to be pretty sounding, basically. The main character was a writer beforehand, so he's able to pick up on the fact that he could create his own spells, basically. Invocations are what my main character does. He takes in the mana of an outside source, which is a spirit or a god, basically, and he expels it through a medium like a wand or a staff. And he invokes the spirits by poetry, basically, by small poems. It's not long poems, like line long,
Hmm.
maybe 2 line longs. But the longer it is, the
Okay.
more powerful it is.
So the most powerful in the world is going to be about how long? Are they going to keep getting longer? If he
The
goes on for 5, 10 lines, you're in trouble.
Yeah, it if you allow your enemy to do 5-10 lines, you probably deserve to die. Like,
is
like I,
is it all a war of words, or are they fighting with fists too?
yeah, they're fighting with fists too.
Okay.
Uh, like the first fight, right, in the series, he draws the attention of a rat man, like a Skaven, basically from Warhammer. He
Uh
draws
huh.
the attention of a rat man from the bottom of a house that he walks into. There's a scene where the rat man just rushes up with a spear and he tries to cast a spell, but he doesn't. So instead, he tries to dodge the spear, but he can't, and he just like cuts a line across his stomach. So he grabs hold of the spear and tries to swing down with his own weapon, but the rat man catches it, so they're kind of like in a lock
Locked.
there. Yeah, most of his combat thus far has been melee. I'll say that.
Okay. Is it I like to, when I get lit RPG people, I like to narrow in on the genre and the setting and stuff. Is it a modern setting or strictly fantasy setting?
It's modern, but there are portals into a more fantasy world that he steps
Okay.
into.
Is it so there it's portal fantasy sort of.
Yeah,
Does
yeah.
the fantasy stuff come our way from the portals, or does he have to go there?
Right now
It's him crossing over into
yeah.
the
That
fantasy
that
world.
that's entering into the
Okay.
bizarre, basically.
I like that.
Slowly, it begins to integrate into both worlds, basically.
So the comics, or the comic that you were talking about that inspired this one, is that in a manga style, or is it in more of a comic style?
It's in the manga style. It's solo leveling is what got me into the genre.
I've heard about that. I've heard a lot of people cite that as their inspiration for writing lit RPG.
Yeah, it's a cool concept. It's you take a normal guy and just throw him into chaos, basically.
Yeah. Have you read much? Have you read much other lit RPG?
Uh, Tree of Eons, if you've ever read that, is really good. I think
Tree of
that's more
Eons.
progression. Chrysalis is another good one. There's one about a spider that came from Japan that I read. I don't remember what it's called, but it was
That
pretty good.
sounds really familiar, though.
But no, I made sure to read the necessities of the genre beforehand. But I think it overall has good storytelling potential. A lot of authors, or a lot of what I read, just casually, they just make their characters overpowered right away, and that I hate to say that kind of annoyed me because I don't like seeing guy wins again. Basically,
Yeah,
I want to see him struggle and improve himself through struggle.
I agree. I feel the same way. I think I already said this. Maybe I'm repeating myself. I don't read a ton of lit RPG. I read fantasy. I read a lot of fantasy for other self-published authors because I'm an editor too. Um, I read literary fiction. I read some mystery. I read some urban fantasy, but but I collaborated with another lit RPG author, so I was kind of like his fantasy guy, and he was the lit RPG guy.
With my lit RPG, I try to incorporate more traditional myths and whatnot. Try to call back to the more traditional fantasies.
Okay, before we get to the end of the podcast, I wanted to ask you, because you're a lit RPG author, I know progression fantasy is not quite the same thing as game lit all the time, but there's overlap. Uh, what's your gaming situation like? Do you have a video game collection? What
It's
games
all
do you
on
play, and how do you curate them?
it's all on Steam. I have a pretty extensive Steam collection. Most of my hours have been sunk into like Skyrim, like thousands of hours. I'm embarrassed to say. Uh,
I mean, if you got to sink hours into something, Skyrim is the one to do it.
and I've only beat it once. That was when it first came out.
That's a good one. What else? What else do you have in there?
I've been playing.
What did you grow up playing? That's a good question too.
What is it? Final Fantasy. I grew up playing Final Fantasy.
Yes. What'd you start with?
I think
What
8.
number?
8.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still one of my favorite Final Fantasy games, but Final Fantasy 9 is also really good. I think. I think 7 is overrated personally. I'm going to cause some controversy. I think it's one of the more overrated of the series.
I won't hold it against you. That was, I think, the first one I played all the way through. I got to the final boss and lost, and realized just how much leveling I would have to do to actually win, and said, you know what, I got far enough. I never beat it. I never chased down the Easter eggs. I had a good time. I think it was an old Nintendo that was like a hand-me-down when I was a kid. They were probably onto like Super Nintendo by the time I was like 8 years old or something, but someone had given us an old Nintendo and it had Final Fantasy 1. So I started with 1, and then I played 3 on Super Nintendo at a friend's house, and it was mind-blowing. And then I think it wasn't until 7.
Did you play the Mario RPG?
Paper Mario?
No. There's a Mario RPG on. I think.
No, I've only played Paper Mario, which was an RPG too.
Okay, but
that was on GameCube.
Yeah, the Mario RPG is actually really good. Like unironically, really, really good.
I mean, Paper Mario was unironically really good, so I'm not surprised.
And, it's a surprising thing, turning the platformer into an RPG.
Yeah. I think we're getting to the end. I should wrap it up. Will you briefly tell us, Tall Owl, where can they find your books? Where can the readers learn more about you? And I'm going to have you send me the links after the podcast ends, and it'll be available in the show notes.
Okay. They could find my writing on Royal Road and Amazon and on Ko-fi, but
this is pushing back the inevitability.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on. Thanks everyone for listening. Just a quick reminder, there is a Discord now, so you can. I'll put the link to the Shelf Builders Discord in the show notes as well. And the authors who have been on the show are welcome to join the Shelf Builders Discord and make a channel for themselves and their books. And hopefully, now that we've done some authors and we've done some lit RPG authors, the next step is I'm going to have some other board game designers, and I think I even had a possible video game designer who was going to come on and talk about their collections for a bit. So until next time, thanks for listening, and keep your bookshelves dry.